The door didn't creak. It slammed against the silence. Caleb froze the instant he stepped inside the mansion. The air wasn't still. It was wrong. Thick, suffocating, like someone had pressed a hand over the house's mouth to keep it from screaming. A faint thud came from the service hallway. Then a gasp, short, sharp, like someone seeing something impossible. Caleb turned. Lena stood there, shoulders rigid, eyes wide, breath torn out of her chest. The rag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor without a sound. Her face drained so fast it looked as if the world had tilted beneath her. She stared at him. Not as an employer, not as a man who wasn't supposed to be home yet, but as someone who wasn't supposed to be alive. Caleb opened his mouth, an instinct, a reflex. But Lena moved before thought could catch up. She lunged toward him, her hand clamping over his wrist and dragging him into the shadows so abruptly his suitcase crashed against the wall. Her voice came out cracked, terrified, barely air. "Caleb, don't make a sound." Not whispered for secrecy, whispered because she was shaking too hard to control it. Footsteps echoed above them, slow, unhurried, too calm for the tension ripping through her body. She pressed him back against the wall, her fingers cold with panic, her eyes fixed on the staircase as if expecting a monster to descend at any second. Caleb followed her gaze. Upstairs, someone laughed. A casual, comfortable laugh. A laugh that didn't belong in a house mourning or waiting for a son. His coat was still on his shoulders. His shoes were still wet from the rain. He had been gone for hours, not days. Yet the voices above spoke with the unsettling ease of people who believed he no longer existed. Lena's breath hitched. Her hand tightened painfully around his sleeve. And for the first time since crossing the threshold, Caleb felt the truth crawl up his spine. He had come home early enough to hear what he was never meant to hear, early enough to survive what was supposed to finish him. And Lena, shaking, terrified, invisible to everyone but him, was the only reason he hadn't stepped into his own death. Lena's grip didn't loosen. If anything, it tightened as Caleb tried to steady his breath. He could feel the tremor running through her hand. Small, sharp, involuntary. She kept her eyes on the staircase as the voices drifted above, weaving together in a rhythm that made his stomach twist. Caleb leaned closer, barely moving his lips. "Lena, what's happening?" She didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because even forming a sentence felt dangerous. Her gaze flicked to him, panic pushing against the rims of her eyes. She shook her head once, slow, deliberate, begging him to stay quiet. Caleb swallowed the instinct to question her again. Something in her expression whispered that his confusion was a luxury he no longer had. Another pair of footsteps crossed overhead. A chair scraped. A voice murmured something he couldn't fully hear. Only the tone, disturbingly calm. Lena flinched. She pressed her back to the wall, pulling him with her until they were concealed behind the arch of the service doorway. Caleb's heartbeat pounded loud in his ears. Too loud, as if the whole mansion could hear it. Lena lifted one hand, small, trembling, and pointed to the floor, urging him to crouch. He hesitated. Caleb wasn't used to taking orders inside his own home, but the fear gripping her was too real to dismiss. He sank down beside her. A thin strip of light from the hallway cut across their faces. From that angle, Lena could see a sliver of the living room doorway upstairs. Caleb watched her eyes focus there, sharp, tense, wounded by something she hadn't yet voiced. Her whisper finally broke free. Just one fragile sentence. "You weren't supposed to open that door today?" Caleb felt the words hit him like cold water. Not dramatic, not mysterious, just true in a way that tightened every muscle in his body. He leaned in, keeping their faces inches apart to avoid a single misplaced echo. "Lena, why not?" Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. She looked toward the upstairs hallway again, her jaw locking. Then, with breath so shallow it barely counted as sound, she answered, "Because they thought you'd be gone by now." Caleb's spine stiffened. Gone, not traveling, not delayed. Gone. The house felt smaller suddenly, its silence no longer still, but predatory. And for the first time since stepping inside, Caleb understood that entering his home early hadn't just surprised his family, it had disrupted a plan already in motion, a plan he wasn't meant to survive. Caleb stared at Lena, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to take back what she'd said, to call it a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation, anything. But she didn't. Her silence was too heavy, too deliberate, too afraid of being overheard. The voices upstairs shifted again. So normal, so casual, it felt cruel. Lena's fingers curled tighter around his sleeve. She wasn't guiding him anymore. She was anchoring herself to him, as if letting go might cost them both something irreversible. Caleb forced his breathing to slow. "Lena," he whispered, "tell me what you know." Her eyes flicked toward him, hesitant, torn. Something inside her was fighting, fear on one side, urgency on the other. Her jaw trembled before she exhaled through her nose, the kind of exhale someone gives when they've run out of time to stay quiet. "They said you were too weak to notice anything," she murmured. "Too tired, too sick to question it." A chill spread through Caleb's chest. Sick. The weakness he'd felt for weeks, the dizziness, the trembling hands, the nausea that never fully broke. He'd blamed stress, overwork, travel. But Lena's expression told him none of it had been accidental. She looked toward the stairs again, then leaned closer, her voice barely a breath. "They thought you wouldn't make it through the weekend." The weekend. 2 days, maybe less. The realization hit him with a force that rippled through his limbs. Someone in his own house had been counting down the hours of his life. Lena saw the shift in his eyes, saw panic flicker there, and gently shook her head. "Not here," she whispered. "Not yet." She released his sleeve only long enough to place her hand on the floor, signaling him to follow. Then she began moving, quietly, expertly, into the narrow service hallway behind them. Caleb hesitated just 1 second, listening to the soft murmur of voices above, the people who believed they were speaking freely because they believed he couldn't hear them ever again. He swallowed hard. Then he crawled after Lena into the darkness. Whatever truths she carried, whatever danger filled these walls, he understood one thing. He couldn't face any of it while standing in the open. And Lena was the only person who knew where he wouldn't be found. The narrow service hallway swallowed Caleb and Lena as they slipped into its shadows, the walls closing around them like the ribs of something alive. The air here was colder, quieter, and yet somehow more dangerous. It carried the muffled heartbeat of the mansion, pipes groaning, vents whispering, faint footsteps above them, each one landing with the weight of a secret. Lena didn't slow down until they reached a cramped intersection where 3 different paths of staff corridors met. She stopped so abruptly that Caleb almost collided with her. Her hand shot out, bracing herself against the wall, fingers trembling so violently she had to curl them into a fist to hide it. Caleb watched her chest rise and fall in shallow breaths. She wasn't simply frightened. She was unraveling under the pressure of something she had held in silence for far too long. "Lena," he whispered, keeping his voice low. "Look at me." She tried. Her gaze darted to him, then immediately to the vent overhead, as if checking whether the walls themselves were listening. The vent rattled softly, carrying scraps of voices from the living room above, light, careless, disturbingly unfazed by the fact that Caleb was standing beneath them, fully alive. Lena's breath hitched. She reached out suddenly and grabbed the front of Caleb's coat with both hands, not to steady herself, to steady him. "You can't speak here," she whispered, her voice frayed at the edges. "Not even a whisper unless you're sure no one's close. Do you understand?" Caleb stared at her, stunned by the terror in her tone. "Lena, tell me what's—" "No." Her whisper cut sharply through his. "Not here. Not out loud." She shook her head again, more violently this time, her fingers tightening until the fabric beneath them bunched. She wasn't trying to silence him because she didn't want to explain. She was silencing him because the walls of this mansion had ears, and she knew exactly how far sound could travel inside them. Caleb lowered his voice to nearly nothing. What are you so afraid they'll hear? Lena swallowed hard. For a moment, her expression shifted, something brittle cracking beneath her exhaustion. She lifted one hand and pressed it against her mouth as if afraid her own breath might betray them. They weren't supposed to hear you walk in, she whispered through her fingers. They weren't supposed to hear anything from you today. Something twisted in Caleb's chest. He leaned closer. Why not? Why would it matter? Lena suddenly released his coat and stepped back, wiping her palms on her apron even though there was nothing on them. She couldn't stop shaking. Her eyes darted between Caleb and the hallway behind him, as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. You don't understand, she murmured, her voice collapsing into a tremor. They thought you wouldn't come back through that door again. Not today, not alive, not walking. Caleb felt the words lodge in his throat. The dizziness, the strange exhaustion, the weakness that had turned his limbs to water for weeks. He had blamed travel, stress, lack of sleep. But Lena's expression, tight, frightened, knowing, told him none of those explanations had ever been the truth. He forced himself to breathe. Lena. What did they do to me? Her lips parted, but for a moment she looked unable to speak, torn between terror and the need to finally say what she had been burying alone. Then her eyes filled with a pain so deep it looked like guilt. They said you were getting worse, she whispered. Too weak to leave your room. Too weak to think straight. Too weak to notice. Notice what? Lena's breath trembled so violently that she had to brace a hand on the wall again. That you weren't sick, Caleb, she swallowed. They were making you sick. Silence crashed between them, heavy, suffocating, final. Above them, laughter drifted through the vent, casual, unbothered, certain he would never hear it again. Lena lowered her voice to a level barely audible, her fear pouring through every syllable. You came home too early. And now they know their plan failed. Caleb didn't move. The corridor felt suddenly colder, narrower, as if the walls themselves recoiled from what Lena had just revealed. They were making you sick. The words echoed through him, reshaping every memory of the last few weeks, every unexplained, dizzy spell, every morning he struggled to get out of bed, every insistence from certain family members that he needed rest, that he shouldn't push himself, that he wasn't thinking clearly. It all snapped into place with a clarity that made his stomach twist. Lena watched the realization darken his eyes. Her hands hovered in the air for a second before she pulled them tight to her chest, as if protecting a truth she wished she didn't know. I wanted to warn you, she whispered, voice cracking at the edges. So many times. But every time I tried, someone was listening, or watching, or asking why I bothered with you so much. Caleb's jaw clenched. Bothered with me? What does that even mean? Lena hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the floor. She pressed her fingertips against the cold tile, grounding herself before she could speak. They said you wouldn't last long, she murmured. So I shouldn't waste my time caring. Caleb felt something burn hot beneath his ribs, a betrayal he hadn't fully grasped until now. He forced himself to breathe, to stay steady, but his voice emerged strained. And you believed them? Her head jerked up, eyes wide and stung. No, she said immediately, shaking her head. Not for a second. I saw what they were doing. I saw the pills change. I saw the drinks left in your room when you were too tired to question them. I saw... She stopped herself, swallowing hard, as if the memories alone threatened to choke her. But no one listens to me here, she whispered. Not really. And if I said something, if I accused anyone, they would fire me before the sentence was finished. Or worse. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt the shift in his presence. Lena, you still tried. Her eyes flickered. Surprise. Guilt. Something else too vulnerable to name. I tried in the only ways I could, she murmured. I hid the worst pills. I replaced some of the drinks. I slowed them down. But I couldn't stop everything without someone noticing. And if they noticed? Her voice tightened with fear. Caleb understood. Because now he felt it too. The presence of danger pressing down on them from the floors above, the cold pulse of a house that seemed almost complicit. He whispered, "Why today? What was supposed to happen today?" Lena braced herself against the wall again, her nails scraping the paint. Her voice came out thin, trembling. "They said you weren't waking up this morning." Caleb's breath left him all at once. "They said your heart would just give out. Quiet. Painless." Her eyes glistened with horror. "And they said it would look natural." Silence swallowed the corridor. Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him, not physically, but in a way that shattered trust, memory, and safety in a single blow. He tried to imagine the scene they had prepared upstairs, the whispers, the rehearsed grief, the staged shock when the news arrived. Lena wiped her eyes quickly, terrified of making any sound. "You weren't supposed to walk through that door," she whispered. "Not after what they gave you last night." Caleb froze. "What they gave me?" Lena nodded once, the movement sharp and terrified. "You drank it," she said. "I saw the glass. I saw you finish it." She drew a shaky breath. "And when I realized you were still alive this morning, I knew something had gone wrong with their plan." Caleb stared at her, heartbeat pounding in his ears. "And now?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. Lena swallowed again, every muscle tense. "Now," she whispered, "they're going to start looking for you, because the only thing worse than you dying today," her voice lowered to almost nothing, "is you waking up." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. Caleb exhaled slowly, forcing his shaking hands to still. He finally understood. This hallway wasn't just a hiding place. It was the thin line between what should have happened today and what was happening now. And whatever came next would depend entirely on Lena, the only person who had risked everything to keep him alive. Lena raised one shaky hand, signaling Caleb to stay absolutely still. Then she pointed toward a thin metal grate further down the hallway, the service observation vent. It connected to the main living room. Staff used it to listen for cues, not secrets. But today, it carried something else entirely. She motioned him closer. Caleb approached slowly, each step heavier than the last, the dread building inside him inch by inch. Lena crouched beside the vent, pressing her ear to the cool metal first, testing, evaluating, before giving him a small nod. Caleb lowered himself beside her. At first he heard only muffled voices, indistinct and almost harmless. But then the sound sharpened, tones he recognized too well, his aunt's clipped confidence, his brother's lazy cynicism, a cousin's forced sympathy that always felt like a performance. "We'll have the attorney handle the announcement," someone said, her voice too steady to belong to someone grieving. "Better to release it tonight. It'll draw less attention." Lena's breath hitched beside him. Another voice, male, calm, detached in a way that made Caleb's stomach tighten, answered, "He wasn't supposed to last this long anyway. We'll frame it as a health complication. Everyone expected that." Caleb went rigid. A chair scraped. Footsteps crossed the room, measured, unhurried, belonging to people who believed they were preparing for something inevitable. "His room is being cleared," another voice added casually. "We'll need space for grandfather's things." Caleb's nails dug into the floor. His things, removed, his life, already redistributed, his absence, already normalized. A cold numbness spread through him, the kind that came not from shock, but from witnessing the undeniable. He wasn't listening to speculation or fear. He was listening to routine, to planning, to execution, to people who had rehearsed life without him. Lena placed a trembling hand on his arm, not in comfort, but in warning. One wrong movement, one breath too loud, and they would lose the only advantage they had. Another voice, his brother's, unmistakable, cut in with a sigh of annoyance. "We should have done it weeks ago. Dragging it out only made things messy. Honestly, I'm surprised the doctors bought the symptoms for so long." Caleb's heart hammered, the world tilting. Doctors? Symptoms? Bought? His chest tightened painfully, and for a moment he feared the panic alone would make a sound. Lena's grip tightened on his sleeve, grounding him, keeping him silent. Someone poured a drink, glass clinking lightly. A toast. To closure, a voice said. Glasses clinked. Caleb's breath faltered. Closure. His death was an event to toast to. Lena closed her eyes as if the sound itself hurt. When she opened them again, there was a raw, protective urgency in her expression, a decision forming in real time, driven not by duty but by a deep, unspoken conviction. She leaned closer, whispering so softly he barely heard, "Now you understand." Caleb did, fully, irrevocably. This wasn't fear. This wasn't paranoia. This was confirmation. He wasn't hiding from danger. He was witnessing its celebration. And the only reason he was alive to see it was the woman crouched beside him, invisible to everyone but him. Caleb stayed frozen by the vent, staring at the silhouettes moving above him. Every word drifting through the metal grate felt like a blow he couldn't dodge. His family wasn't speculating about his health. They were organizing his absence, smoothly, calmly, as if they'd waited for this moment. A toast. To closure. The sound of glasses clinking hit him harder than any confession could. Beside him, Lena tensed. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. She felt the shift in his breathing. The moment disbelief gave way to something colder, heavier. Caleb whispered, "They're relieved." Lena's silence confirmed it. Another voice rose. "Once his things are cleared, we'll finalize the transition." His things, his life, reassigned before his heart had even stopped. Caleb's jaw tightened, the numbness spreading through his chest. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, not because he feared them, but because he finally understood them. Lena leaned closer. "We need to leave," she murmured, urgency trembling beneath her voice. But Caleb didn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the vent, as if watching them would anchor him to a reality that suddenly felt too unreal to accept. "They never planned to save me," he said softly. Lena swallowed hard. "They planned for you to be gone." He looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't guessing. She had known. She had carried this truth alone, powerless to speak it aloud until now. A chair scraped overhead. Footsteps approached the staircase. Lena's hand hovered near his sleeve, not touching him, but begging him to act. "Caleb, now." Another step. Closer. Caleb forced himself to move. The shift in him was small but decisive, pain tightening into purpose. He nodded. Lena stood first, guiding him deeper into the service corridor, her steps swift and silent. Caleb followed, leaving behind the vent, the voices, the plans made in his absence. The footsteps above descended one more step. Caleb didn't look back. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because the moment he saw how easily they lived without him, something inside him stopped belonging to that room forever. Lena led Caleb deeper into the service passage, the narrow walls forcing them to move close enough that he could hear her shaky breaths. The hallway twisted through the skeleton of the mansion, a place meant for staff, not heirs. Pipes hummed overhead. Dust swirled in the thin strips of light leaking from old vents. Only when Lena was certain the footsteps upstairs faded did she stop. Caleb steadied himself against the wall, still reeling from what he'd witnessed. "What exactly did they do to me?" His whisper carried a weight he hadn't allowed himself to feel before. Lena hesitated, just long enough for him to see how much she feared saying it aloud. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her apron, twisting the fabric until her knuckles whitened. "They made it look like sickness," she murmured. "That's why no one questioned it. Your fatigue, the headaches, the tremors. They counted on you thinking it was stress." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. Every symptom he had dismissed now resurfaced with new meaning, intentional, calculated. Lena's voice softened, but the tremor in it betrayed her. They changed things in your room. Your drinks, your supplements. They monitored how you reacted. And every time you got weaker, they acted like they were worried. He felt the floor tilt beneath him. You knew, he whispered. Lena's eyes closed for a moment, a brief flicker of guilt crossing her face. I suspected first. Then I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. Hidden bottles, switched labels. I tried to warn you without actually saying it, but you were so tired you barely noticed. Caleb swallowed hard. And you didn't tell anyone else. Her laugh was small and broken. Tell who? The staff? They would throw me out. Tell your family. They would smile and tell me I misunderstood. She lifted her gaze to him, full of fear. Yes, but also something steadier beneath it. No one listens to people like me here, Caleb. They don't even look at us. Her words hit deeper than he had expected. Lena exhaled shakily. And when I finally understood the whole plan, it was too late. You were already fading. Caleb pressed a hand to his chest as if trying to hold himself together. The symptoms he had blamed on exhaustion were pieces of a puzzle she had carried alone. His voice came out lower than he intended. Why risk telling me now? Lena swallowed. Because staying silent won't save you anymore. Caleb stared at Lena, her last words echoing in the tight space between them. Staying silent won't save you anymore. The phrase landed with the weight of a verdict, not a warning. For a moment, neither of them moved. The quiet of the service corridor wrapped around them, thick, heavy, expectant. Caleb's mind raced through days, weeks, months of exhaustion he dismissed as his own failing. Now every memory reformed into something sharper, darker. He forced his voice out, low and controlled. How long have you known? Lena didn't look away. Long enough to know it wouldn't stop on its own. Her honesty cut deeper than any lie could have. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't sugarcoating anything. She was standing in front of him with nothing but truth, and that, somehow, felt more jarring than the betrayal echoing from upstairs. Caleb pressed a hand against the wall, steadying himself. They were poisoning me, he said quietly, as if naming it made it more real. Lena's breath trembled. Yes. He let his eyes close for half a second, absorbing what that word meant. His own family. His own home. The walls he had trusted were the very ones that had watched him weaken, day after day. When he opened his eyes again, something in them had hardened. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. Why help me? He asked, voice raw. Why take this risk for me? Lena froze. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because saying it out loud felt heavier than she expected. She stepped back a little, leaning against the wall across from him, her fingers twisting nervously in her apron. Because I saw what was happening, she whispered, and no one else cared. Everyone kept saying you were fragile, but you weren't. You were being broken. Caleb felt that. Lena looked down at her hands before continuing, her voice softening. And I couldn't watch them do it anymore. Even if no one listened. Even if it cost me everything. Caleb exhaled slowly, something shifting inside him, something he hadn't felt since the weakness began. Resolve. Lena wasn't just informing him. She was pushing him toward a choice he could no longer avoid. Footsteps echoed faintly above again, closer this time, pulling both their gazes upward. Lena stiffened instantly. They'll notice you're not in your room, she whispered. Caleb straightened, the remnants of shock replaced by a sharper awareness. And when they do, Lena added, her voice barely a breath, they'll realize their plan didn't work. A moment of silence stretched between them, charged, electric, heavy with what must come next. Caleb nodded slowly. Then we move, he said. Lena's shoulders lifted in a tense, shaky breath. She turned toward the deeper passageways where only staff dared to walk. And for the first time since stepping into the mansion, Caleb didn't follow out of fear. He followed because he had something to fight for now. Lena led the way through the narrow service tunnels, her steps quick but uneven, as if her body moved on instinct while her mind fought to stay composed. Caleb followed close behind, the stale air thick with dust and the echo of truths he couldn't unhear. After a few turns, she stopped abruptly in a cramped alcove used for storage. A single weak bulb flickered overhead. The faint, trembling light made her look smaller, almost fragile, but not broken. Never broken. Caleb watched her shoulders tense before she finally spoke. "I didn't stay silent because I didn't care," Lena whispered. "I stayed silent because I was afraid." Her voice wavered, not with weakness but with the weight of carrying something alone for too long. Caleb took a step closer, but not enough to crowd her. "What were you afraid of?" She let out a shaky breath and pressed her back to the wall, eyes lowering as if the truth itself embarrassed her. "Of them," she admitted. "Of what they could do to someone like me. I'm invisible here, Caleb. They don't see me, but they can destroy me if they want to. Losing this job means losing everything." Her fingers twisted nervously in her apron until the fabric stretched. "And every time I thought about telling someone, I imagined them turning it back on me, saying I misunderstood, saying I was lying, saying I wanted attention." Her voice cracked at the last word. Caleb felt something inside him tighten, not anger at her, but at the system she lived under, the way silence had been her only protection. Lena looked up at him then, and the fear in her eyes was raw, unshielded. "But I can't stay quiet anymore," she said. "Not now. Not after today." She paused, swallowing hard. "If you die, everything I know dies with you. They erase you. They erase the truth. And I become the girl who imagined things. And you," her voice softened to a fragile whisper, "you become their story, not your own." Caleb stared at her, the implications hitting all at once. Lena needed him alive, not out of self-interest, but because the truth had no voice unless he could speak it. He took a breath. "You're saying I'm the only proof?" Lena nodded once, slowly. "And I'm the only one who saw what they were doing." Their eyes met, fear in hers, resolve beginning to form in his. Two people who had never truly seen each other before today were now bound by danger, truth, and the decision already pressing down on them. Survival wasn't optional. It was necessary, for both of them. The consequence. She finally exposes the full extent of her fear, and the decision she's making now changes everything. Lena took a shaky breath, the weak bulb above them buzzing softly as if echoing her nerves. Caleb waited, sensing she hadn't finished, that something heavier was still pressing against her chest, begging to be released. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, but steadier. "I didn't just see what they were doing," she murmured. "I saw who was doing it." Caleb's heartbeat faltered. He hadn't asked for names, not because he didn't want them, but because part of him feared what the answer would force him to confront. Lena looked down at her hands, as if the truth lived in the trembling of her fingers. "I saw the bottles replaced," she continued. "I saw the powders being mixed into your drinks. I saw the way they watched you right after, waiting to see if it worked." Her throat tightened, the memory clearly burning. "And every time you got weaker, they looked satisfied, like it was confirmation they were on the right path." Caleb's breath left his lungs in a slow, controlled exhale. He had felt their eyes on him. He had dismissed it as concern. Now it replayed differently. Colder, calculated. Lena took a half step toward him, not touching him, but close enough that he felt the urgency radiating from her. "I kept notes," she whispered. "Dates, times, what I saw. I hid them because if anyone found out, they'd fire me. Or worse." He blinked, startled. "You documented it?" She nodded once, the motion small but resolute. "I thought maybe one day it would matter. Maybe one day someone would believe me." Her eyes lifted to his. "But I never expected that person to be you." Caleb felt a weight settle in his chest, Not fear, but responsibility. Lena stepped back, gathering a breath that steadied her trembling voice. "You asked why I'm helping you," she said softly. "It's because silence isn't safety anymore. If I don't speak now, if I don't help you now, then I'm part of it, and I can't live with that." Her gaze met his fully. Vulnerable, honest, terrified, brave. "I need you alive, Caleb. Not just for me, for the truth." For the first time since entering the mansion, Caleb felt the shift, a turning of something inside him. Not just survival, not just fear, purpose. He straightened slowly, the decision forming without needing to be spoken. Lena saw it. She exhaled in relief, just barely. And in that tiny, trembling breath, an unspoken pact formed. If they were going to expose what happened here, they would have to do it together. Caleb didn't speak at first. The narrow corridor seemed to press inward, forcing the realization deeper into him. Lena stood a few steps away, her hands still twisting nervously, waiting, half afraid of his reaction, half afraid of what would happen if he didn't react at all. The truth settled slowly, but heavily. Everyone upstairs, every familiar voice he had grown up trusting, had built a world where his disappearance was not tragedy, but convenience. And here, in the cold, dust-filled ribs of the mansion, a single person had carried the weight of saving him, someone they never valued, someone they never thanked, someone they never even saw. He watched Lena adjusting the sleeve of her apron, a gesture so habitual and small it hurt to look at. She had done everything silently, protecting him in ways he never noticed, never imagined. Caleb's voice came out low. "You were alone in this." Lena blinked, startled by the softness of his tone. "I tried to warn you," she whispered. "In little ways, I don't blame you for not seeing them. No one notices. People like me." That last sentence hit him harder than anything said upstairs. He stepped closer, not looming, not towering, but simply closing the distance she had been conditioned to keep. "I should have," he said. "Lena, I should have seen you." Her breath caught, a small, involuntary sound. She wasn't used to being acknowledged, much menos with sincerity. She lowered her eyes, or tried to, but he gently shook his head. "No. Look at me." Slowly, uncertainly, she raised her gaze. Caleb held it, unflinching. "You're the only person who didn't stand by and watch me die," he said, the emotion under his voice controlled but unmistakable. "You're the only person who fought for me when I couldn't even stand." Lena's eyes shimmered, not with tears exactly, but with the impact of finally being seen. The fear didn't vanish, but something shifted behind it. Courage, small but present. She swallowed, voice fragile. "I couldn't let them take you." Caleb nodded once, a deliberate, grounding gesture. "And I won't let them take you," he said. For a moment, the corridor felt different, less like a hiding place and more like the beginning of something neither of them had expected. A partnership born not of choice, but of necessity and truth. Lena exhaled shakily, a breath that carried relief and new fear all at once. Because now Caleb understood. And once understanding takes root, it doesn't loosen. Lena didn't look away immediately. The silence that stretched entre eles tinha textura, densa, carregada, quasi elétrica. Caleb felt it settle on his skin, a weight that wasn't fear, but recognition. Everything she had done, the small warnings, the quiet interventions, the risks no one would ever credit her for, finally made sense. And he saw her, really saw her, talvez pela primera vez. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but nothing came. The tremor in her hands returned, subtle but unmistakable. It wasn't weakness. It was the release that comes when someone has carried too much for too long. Caleb stepped closer, not with authority, but with gravity. The pull of someone who had finally woken up to his own life. "You're different now," Lena whispered, noticing the shift in him. "I'm not sick anymore," he said quietly. "I'm aware." The hallway hummed with distant vibrations. Footsteps above, drawers opening, a door closing somewhere far away. Caleb's senses sharpened, mapping every sound, every movement. For the first time, he wasn't drifting through his own home in a haze. He was present, alert, dangerous. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, a small, protective gesture. "You weren't supposed to see any of this," she murmured. "I wasn't supposed to survive," Caleb corrected. Her breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to say it out loud. She hadn't expected him to claim it with such calm intensity. Caleb's voice softened. "You kept me alive when I didn't even understand I was dying." Lena shook her head. "I just tried. Anyone would have—" "No," he said, sharper than planned. "Not anyone. Not them." She froze. Her throat bobbed in a swallow so small it looked painful. He continued, slower, more deliberate. "You acted. You paid attention. You cared when no one else did." Lena let her back slide down the wall until she was almost sitting, the weight of his acknowledgement almost too much. She had learned to be invisible to survive, and now someone was holding a light directly over her. Caleb crouched slightly to stay level with her. "They don't see you," he said softly. "But I do." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away quickly, as if tears would compromise their safety. "This house isn't built for people like me," she said. "We only exist when needed." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And they needed you silent." Lena bowed her head, a confession without words. He let a beat pass before speaking again. "You're in danger now." Her eyes shot up. Caleb elaborated, voice steady despite the storm he felt brewing inside. "If they realize I'm alive, the first thing they'll wonder is who helped me, who was closest, who saw too much." Lena exhaled shakily. "I know." Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice to a tone meant for survival. "And I won't let them hurt you because of me." Something cracked then. Not fear, but the quiet collapse of the wall she had built to protect herself emotionally. She shook her head softly, trying to argue. "Caleb, you can't shield me from a family like yours. They have power. I'm just—" "Don't finish that sentence," he said firmly. She blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. "You're not just anything. You're the only reason I'm breathing. And that matters more than every title upstairs." Lena stood slowly, steadied by his affirmation, yet frightened of what it implied. "We need to go," she whispered. "Once they find your room empty." "They'll come looking," Caleb finished. "And when they do," Lena added, her voice trembling, "they'll know I didn't keep quiet this time." Caleb felt the shift inside himself, the moment emotion turns into action. He straightened, shoulders firming with purpose. "Then staying hidden isn't enough. We move now." Lena hesitated, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the cost. He took a single step forward, bridging the last of the emotional distance. "Lead the way, Lena." She nodded, breath unsteady but determined. And when she turned into the deeper, darker hallway, Caleb followed, not because he was scared, but because for the first time, he trusted the right person. Lena moved first, slipping into a narrow passage where the ceiling dropped low and the walls tightened. Caleb followed without hesitation. The faint echo of footsteps above sharpened his awareness, but Lena didn't flinch. She listened, mapped, calculated. This was her territory, not theirs. She paused beside an old utility door and tapped its frame twice, then once, a rhythm that seemed meaningless until the latch clicked softly. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "How did you—" "Staff code," she murmured. "Locks don't open for everyone, only for those who clean behind them." There was no pride in her voice, no boast, just fact, quiet expertise shaped by years of being overlooked. They slipped inside, entering a storage crawl space running parallel to the main hall. Through the thin slits in the aged boards, Caleb could hear voices passing. One was familiar. Painfully familiar. His brother. "Check his room again." "I want to be sure." Lena pressed a finger to her lips and guided Caleb deeper, leading him through a path only someone who lived in the seams of the house could know. She avoided creaking floor panels with practiced precision. She stopped abruptly when a shadow crossed the light from the hallway. Caleb stiffened, but she held her hand out gently. Wait. Her stillness wasn't fear. It was strategy. When the danger passed, she continued, her steps gentle but quick. After a few turns, they emerged into a forgotten laundry chamber, machinery humming just enough to drown a whisper. Caleb caught his breath. You know this house better than they do. Lena didn't look at him, but the faintest flicker of something, not pride but truth, crossed her expression. They walk where they're meant to, she said quietly. I walk where the house hides its secrets. Caleb's chest tightened with new understanding. She wasn't just protecting him. She was navigating a battlefield she'd studied her entire life. A sudden creak sounded above, someone entering the back staircase. Lena's eyes widened. They're close, she whispered. We don't have much time. Caleb leaned in, steady. Tell me what to do. Her inhale was sharp, surprised. No one spoke to her like that. No one asked. No one trusted. She pointed to a chute in the corner, narrow but passable. This drops us to the old servants' hall. They never use it. Caleb nodded. And as she led him toward it, Lena realized something. For the first time, she wasn't guiding a master. She was guiding an equal. Lena knelt beside the old laundry chute, testing the metal frame with the back of her hand. The mansion was old. One wrong touch could echo through its bones like a warning bell. Satisfeita como silencio, she pulled the panel open. A cool draft rose from the darkness below. It's safe, she whispered. Well, safer than here. Caleb didn't hesitate. He lowered himself in first, gripping the edges while Lena guided his movements. The chute was tight, coated with dust and the faint scent of detergent long settled. Halfway down, the sound of footsteps thundered somewhere above. Rushed, impatient, they were searching. Caleb felt his pulse jump, but Lena's voice floated down, soft but steady. Don't stop. They won't look for you where I take you. Her certainty grounded him in a way nothing else could. When he reached the bottom, he landed in a dark corridor lined with abandoned supply shelves. Moments later, Lena slid down beside him with a quiet thud, immediately brushing dust from her clothes, not out of vanity, but out of habit formed by years of being watched for imperfections. She pressed her ear to the lower vent. Voices drifted in faint, distorted murmurs. They're splitting up, Lena said. East wing, west wing, and the lower halls. If they reach the boiler room before us... Caleb stepped closer. What happens there? Lena bit her lip, the first sign of true fear he'd seen in her since they started moving. That's where the cameras feed into. If they check the system, they'll see you walking the halls. They'll know you're alive, and that you're not alone. Caleb's chest tightened. Then we get there first, he said. Lena blinked, not at the plan, but at the way he said we. For years, she'd survived by being solitary, hidden, quiet. Now someone stood beside her without hesitation, someone who had everything to lose. She guided him into the narrow lower hallway, steps swift but silent. Pipes rattled above them, the mansion shifting as if warning its inhabitants of their movement. Stay close, she whispered. These halls twist, if you take the wrong turn. I won't, Caleb said. Not while you're leading. Lena swallowed hard. She wasn't used to trust. She wasn't used to being essential. And yet, here she was, the only compass in a house built to keep her unseen. As they slipped into a dim staircase leading farther down, Lena felt something new rising in her. Not fear, not obedience, responsibility. Because for the first time in her life, someone's survival, someone who mattered, depended entirely on her. The staircase ended in a narrow concrete corridor buried deep beneath the mansion, where the air smelled of old stone and untouched storage. A single emergency bulb flickered overhead, casting long, nervous shadows that kept folding and unfolding across the floor like restless ghosts. Lena quickened her pace, scanning every door as though the walls themselves could betray them. Caleb stayed only a step behind her, still adjusting to the strange sensation of clarity. His thoughts sharper now, no longer dulled by the haze they had forced on him for weeks. He could hear the mansion breathing above them, pipes, footsteps, doors opening, voices shifting. It all blended into a distant hunt. "They'll check my room soon," he murmured, voice low. Lena didn't look back. "They may have already checked. We need to be outside before they organize anything." Her words carried no dramatics, just truth, stripped, urgent, and precise. They reached a reinforced metal door at the end of the hallway. Faded yellow paint peeled off the frame. Caleb frowned. "What is this?" "The old service loading exit," Lena whispered. She pulled a small key ring from inside her apron, its metal faintly glinting under the flickering light. "Staff use it for deliveries. Family almost forgot it exists." She inserted a key, then paused, not out of hesitation, but calculation. If they've reactivated the alarm system, this door will trigger it. Caleb held his breath. "Can you tell?" Lena lowered her head slowly, listening. A few seconds passed. "No hum," she said finally. "No vibration in the frame. It's dead." She turned the lock. The door opened with a sigh, and a gust of cold night air rushed in. Caleb inhaled sharply. The outside world didn't feel freeing. It felt startling, almost violent in contrast to the suffocating mansion. Lena stepped out first, scanning the narrow service road that ran along the back of the estate. Trees leaned over the cracked pavement, branches swaying with the wind like silent warnings. "It's clear," she whispered. Caleb stepped beside her, the chill seeping into his bones but sharpening his senses. For the first time in weeks, he felt fully awake, aware of every movement, every breath, every danger. "Where do we go?" His voice carried both urgency and trust. Lena kept her eyes forward. "There's someone in town, a clinician. He doesn't care about families like yours. He just cares about patients." "Someone you trust?" Caleb asked. She hesitated. "I don't really have people I trust, but he listens. He doesn't look through me like the rest." There was something in her tone that made Caleb realize how rare that simple act was for her, being noticed. They walked down the road, keeping to the shadows. Gravel crunched softly under their steps. The estate, towering behind them, now felt like a creature watching its prey slip from its reach. Lena continued, voice low. "He won't ask questions you can't answer. He won't be intimidated by the family name. And if you're still being poisoned, he'll find it." Caleb clenched his jaw. "Still being?" She cut him gently but firmly. "The effects don't disappear overnight. You're getting better, but whatever they used, we need to know how much is still inside you." Caleb's stomach tightened. The idea that his body still carried traces of their plan felt like a chain he hadn't finished breaking. Lena noticed his breathing shift. "That's why we need proof," she whispered. "Before they realize we're gone." She wasn't afraid of running. She was afraid of running without evidence, of everything she had seen turning into nothing more than accusations from someone no one would believe. Caleb looked at her, seeing the layers beneath her fear. The years of silence, the weight of invisibility, the desperation to finally be heard. He spoke with a quiet intensity. "We'll get that proof, and they won't touch you again." Lena's breath faltered, not from fear this time, but from hearing a promise no one had ever made to her. They continued down the lonely service road, swallowed slowly by the dark. The mansion faded behind them, but its threat lingered, a shadow stretching across the night, waiting, calculating. But for the first time, Caleb had something the mansion hadn't accounted for. Not just survival. Not just clarity. Someone who knew its every secret and chose him. The town was small, its streets quiet at this hour, lit only by dim lamps and the soft glow of closed storefronts. Lena kept her hood low, guiding Caleb through alleys rather than main roads. Not because anyone would recognize her, they never did, but because Caleb's disappearance would spread through the estate like wildfire once discovered. Every shadow mattered. "We're close," Lena murmured. The clinic was wedged between an old laundromat and a shuttered deli, the kind of place most people passed without noticing. But Lena walked toward it with the familiarity of someone who had entered through the back door 100 times to clean after hours. The side entrance was unlocked, as she predicted. Lena slipped in first, ushering Caleb inside before closing the door quietly behind them. "Doctor." Mason was still there, hunched over paperwork, glasses askew, exhaustion hanging on him like a second coat. He looked up only when Lena stepped into the pool of lamplight. "Lena?" he said, surprised. "It's almost midnight. What happened?" She didn't speak right away. She stepped aside, revealing Caleb in the doorway. Mason's brow furrowed. Even tired, he recognized the signs immediately. The weakness in Caleb's posture, the faint tremor in his fingers, the pallor that spoke of something far more insidious than stress. "What did they give you?" Mason asked bluntly. Caleb blinked. "You can tell already." Mason gestured him forward. "I've seen this kind of thing. Not often, but enough." Lena tensed beside him. This was why she brought Caleb here. Mason didn't care about pedigree or reputation. He cared about symptoms. Caleb sat on the examination table. Mason's movements were quick but careful, checking reflexes, pupils, pulse, the faint discoloration under the skin. Each finding made his frown deepen. Finally, Mason stepped back. "This wasn't accidental," he said. "Your system shows signs of repeated exposure to something synthetic, slow-acting, probably disguised in drinks or medication." Lena looked down, confirming silently what she had feared for months. Caleb steadied himself against the table, jaw tightening. "Can you identify it?" Mason nodded. "I can run a panel. It won't take long. And if what I think is correct, your dosage was increasing over time?" Increasing. Deliberate. Measured. Lena's breath stalled. Caleb forced his voice steady. "Am I still in danger?" Mason hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of concern. "If they planned your dosage carefully," he said, "then yes, whatever they gave you doesn't leave the bloodstream quickly. Without treatment, you'd eventually weaken again. But..." He turned to Lena, then back to Caleb. "With the right intervention, we can reverse this. Not instantly, but enough to stabilize you." Lena's shoulders sagged in a mixture of relief and fear. "But that's not the part that worries me most," Mason added quietly. Caleb frowned. "There's more." Mason lowered his voice. Someone wanted this to look natural. Heart failure, exhaustion, a collapse no one would question. Caleb felt the words strike deep, not because they were new, but because this time they came from someone objective, someone without motive. Mason reached into a drawer and produced a sealed kit. "I'll need a blood sample. Once I have it, you'll have proof. Hard, direct proof." Lena exhaled sharply, hope breaking through her fear. Caleb extended his arm without hesitation. When Mason finished drawing the sample, he placed the vial into a labeled container. "I'll run the analysis now," he said, "but you both need to understand something." They waited. "If someone went this far," Mason said softly, "they won't stop just because you walked out of the house." Lena's hands curled into fists. Caleb nodded slowly. "That's why we're here," he said. Mason met his gaze, steady, grim, respectful. "Then stay together," he said. "Because whatever you uncover next, you'll need each other to survive it." Caleb kept his attention on the hum of the clinic machines, but Lena's stillness beside him pulled his focus more than the whirring diagnostics ever could. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't panicking. She was thinking, and that worried him more. "Lena," he said quietly. What is it? She inhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the floor as though the truth might be written there. There's something at the mansion, she murmured. Something that proves what they've been doing. Caleb straightened. What kind of proof? A drive, she said, hidden in the staff office. It has lists, schedules, orders for things that only make sense if you know someone was being targeted. He stepped closer, disbelief and anger tightening his voice. You've seen it? I found it by accident, she replied. And I didn't touch it again. If anyone suspected me, they would have made sure I never said a word. Caleb felt the room shrink. And you want to go back for it? Lena didn't answer, but her silence spoke louder than any confession. Lena, absolutely not, he said. They'll notice you're gone. They'll be checking every hallway by now. That's why I have to go now, she whispered, before they calm down, before they think to search the staff rooms. Caleb shook his head, firm. I'll go with you. You can't, she said, almost pleading. They'll see you the second you cross the gate. You don't know the blind spots, the shifts, the inspection times. And you do, he replied bitterly. Lena finally looked up at him, eyes afraid, but resolute. I know that house better than anyone inside it. I've walked its corners in silence for years. I can get to the drive without being seen. Caleb exhaled sharply, frustration tightening every muscle. And if something happens... Her voice softened, but her resolve didn't waver. If I don't go, something will happen. To you. And then none of this matters. He stared at her, breath uneven. She wasn't choosing recklessness. She was choosing necessity. Lena stepped closer, lowering her voice. You asked why I helped you, she said. This is why, because the truth needs someone brave enough to bring it into the light. A beat passed, then another. Caleb's chest tightened with a fear deeper than anything he'd felt in the mansion. Lena, don't do this alone. She shook her head softly. I have to. For you. For the truth. For both of us. Before he could protest again, she turned toward the clinic door, small, trembling, resolute, the invisible girl about to walk back into the lion's mouth. Lena moved quickly through the cold night, the clinic fading behind her as the mansion rose ahead like a dark, waiting beast. Every instinct screamed for her to turn back, but she kept going. Caleb needed proof, and she was the only one who knew where it was buried. The rear service gate loomed in silence. She crouched low, scanning the fence line. The broken sensor light still flickered, just as it had for months. No one bothered fixing anything meant for staff. That negligence was her advantage. She slipped through the gate's gap and crossed the garden, sticking to the deep shadows beneath the hedges. The mansion's windows glowed with restless movement, silhouettes pacing, lights switching on, voices rising in agitation. They knew Caleb was missing. They knew she was too. Her heart pounded, but her steps stayed light, precise. She reached the disguised maintenance panel near the laundry wing, pressed the hidden latch, and slid inside before her breath caught up with her. The service corridor felt different now. Tighter, colder, as if the mansion itself sensed an intruder in its veins. Lena paused, listening. Distant voices echoed through the ventilation shafts. Check the back exits. He couldn't have gotten far. And find the maid. Someone had to help him. Lena swallowed hard. They were already looking for her. She pressed herself against the wall and began moving through the narrow path behind the pantry, a space barely wide enough for her shoulders. She'd used it to avoid supervisors before. Tonight, it might save her life. After several turns, she reached the small staff office. The door was unlocked, as always. No one believed anything valuable enough to steal could exist in a servant's space. Lena slipped in and closed the door silently behind her. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she crossed to the old filing cabinet. She knelt and reached behind it, fingers searching for the loose panel she'd memorized by touch alone. There. She lifted it, breath trembling. The drive was still tucked inside, small, plain, dangerous. She closed her hand around it, pressing it tight against her chest. But before she could move, Footsteps echoed down the hall, sharp, fast, purposeful. Someone was coming straight toward the office. Lena froze, heart slamming against her ribs. She had the proof. Now she just had to survive the next few seconds. Lena stayed frozen beneath the desk. The drive pressed so tightly against her chest, she could feel her heartbeat pounding through it. The footsteps outside the staff office grew sharper, heavier, too close. She didn't dare adjust her breathing. The doorknob turned. A thin strip of hallway light cut across the floor as the door inched open. 2 sets of shoes stepped inside, polished leather, the kind only the family wore. They scanned the room without urgency. They weren't searching a threat. They were searching a loose end. Nothing, one muttered. She wouldn't come back here. The other replied. She knows better. Lena's throat tightened. She had known better. Until the truth demanded otherwise. One of the men walked closer to the desk. His steps slowed. He crouched. Lena saw his hand drop into view, inches from her foot. Her entire body screamed to flee, but she didn't move, didn't blink. The hand hovered, then retracted. "Let's go," he said. "We need her before she reaches the boy." Their footsteps faded down the hall. Lena waited, counting her breaths in trembling increments. When the silence held steady, she slid out from beneath the desk and rose on shaking legs. The room swayed for a moment, but she steadied herself with one hand on the cabinet. She had the drive. Now she needed to get out alive. Moving through the service corridor, she kept to the shadows, using every blind turn and hidden nook she'd memorized over years of invisibility. Voices echoed from the main hall. Frantic, disorganized. "He's alive somewhere. She must have helped him. Check every exit." Lena slipped past them, ghost-like, unseen. She reached the laundry wing's side panel, the same maintenance door she'd entered through. Her fingers fumbled on the latch, but it opened with a soft click. Cold night air swept in, biting her skin and pushing her forward. She stepped outside, pulling the panel shut just as a cluster of flashlights crossed the hallway inside. She didn't wait to breathe. She ran, across the back lawns, through the shadows of the garden walls, past the service gate she'd slipped through earlier. Her lungs burned, her legs shook, but she clutched the drive tighter with every step. Not until she reached the road did she finally stop, chest heaving, throat raw, fear still clawing at her ribs. Then she turned toward town. Caleb was alive. Caleb was waiting. And now she carried the truth that could destroy everyone who wanted him dead. The mansion was buzzing like a disturbed hive when Caleb stepped through the front doors. Voices collided in the foyer, frantic, angry, disbelieving. Flashlights swept across the hall. Orders were barked. Someone shouted his name as if summoning a ghost. Every head turned. Caleb stood tall. The shock that rippled through the room was instant. His aunt staggered back. His brother's mouth fell open. A cousin actually dropped the phone in his hand. "You?" His brother choked. "You're alive," Caleb finished, his voice steady, cutting through the chaos. "Yes, that seems to ruin quite a few plans, doesn't it?" Silence hit the room like a slap. Then the doors behind him opened again, and Lena stepped inside. Her clothes were wrinkled, her face pale, hair wind-tossed from running. She held the drive in her trembling hand, fingers wrapped around it like a lifeline. The moment the family noticed her, their expressions shifted. Recognition, then suspicion, then fury. Caleb stepped in front of her, shielding her without hesitation. "You don't touch her," he said, his voice dropping into something cold and unfamiliar even to himself. "She's the only reason I'm standing here." His aunt's voice cracked with outrage. "She's manipulating you." "No," Caleb snapped. "She saved me." The words echoed through the cavernous foyer. He took the drive from Lena and lifted it for all to see. "This contains your schedules, your orders, your preparations, everything you tried to hide while you waited for me to die." His gaze sharpened. "And now there's medical proof, too." A few family members went pale. Others took a step back. His brother's jaw clenched so tightly it trembled. Caleb continued. "You poisoned me. Slowly. Carefully. You counted on me being too weak to question anything." Lena stood behind him, small but unyielding. And when I didn't die, Caleb added, you went looking for someone to blame, someone you thought was disposable. His gaze burned into each of them. She isn't disposable. She saved my life. She risked hers to get the truth. The room was silent. Finally, painfully silent.
Then Caleb spoke one final line, the one that split the mansion open. From now on, she's under my protection, and this house will never treat her as invisible again. Lena's breath shook, not with fear this time, but with something she had never felt in these walls. Worth, recognition, dignity. The truth didn't just expose them, it restored her. The foyer remained silent long after Caleb's words faded. The truth hovered in the air like a storm finally breaking over the mansion. His family stared back at him, shaken, cornered, exposed. Every lie they'd hidden behind collapsed under the weight of the evidence Lena risked everything to bring. Caleb lowered the drive, then looked at her. Lena didn't shrink the way she once had. She stood steady behind him, small, exhausted, trembling, but unmistakably present. For the first time in her life within these walls, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't background. She was the reason the truth stood here at all. When the authorities arrived, sirens echoing through the stone arches, Caleb didn't step aside or falter. He stayed beside Lena as statements were taken, as bags of evidence were collected, as his family struggled to explain what could no longer be denied. By morning, the house felt different. Lighter, honest, even in its ruin. Caleb led Lena outside, toward the quiet stretch of garden glowing under the first soft breath of dawn. She hesitated, unsure of what life looked like beyond fear, beyond silence. "What happens now?" she whispered. Caleb took a breath filled with something new. Clarity, strength, purpose. "Now we start over," he said. "And this time, you're not alone." Lena lowered her gaze, overwhelmed, but when she lifted it again, there was a quiet spark behind her eyes. Hope, not borrowed, not fragile, but hers. She had walked into the mansion unseen. She walked out recognized, valued, and forever changed. And Caleb walked out alive, finally aware of who had saved him and who he needed to protect in return. Together, they stepped into a future untouched by the shadows behind them. If this story made your heart race, if you felt anger, fear, or relief when the truth finally came out, comment below. Which moment hit you the hardest, and why? Your insights help shape the next emotional stories we bring to life. Leave a like. Likes tell the platform that people want real narratives, stories with tension, justice, and transformation. And now, tap the video on your screen. It continues the same theme of hidden truths and powerful turnarounds. If you connected with this story, you don't want to miss what comes next. Your engagement doesn't just support the channel, it directly influences the stories we create for you.